Mexico City is the core area of Mexico and the seventh and last of our subregions. In many ways, it dominates the country, but not least of which because Mexico City is the capital of the country. Take a look here. You can see that I've circled Mexico City for you so you can see where it's at. As many of you may already know, Mexico City was built on top of and with the ruins of another city that predated it, Tenochtitlan. This was not the first time in history one group of people sacked the city of another group of people and then tore it down and built their own urban center, or one in which a city was built on top of another city. Rome, Paris, Baghdad, Jerusalem, most old cities in India, Cairo, even St. Louis, and the list goes on. Tenochtitlan was the center of the second of the three great indigenous culture hearths that existed about the time the Spanish arrived. Remember, Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492, just to give you an idea of the time frame we're talking about. And as a refresher, a culture hearth is the site of a major civilization in which people develop agriculture, architecture, religion, and a cohesive political system within an integrated society. In the case of Tenochtitlan, it was the center of what is commonly called the Aztec Empire, which lasted from about 1200 AD until 1521, a very specific ending date. Let's take a look at this diorama of Tenochtitlan around the peak of the Aztec society. This is, by the way, from the Anthropology Museum in Chapultepec Park in Mexico City, one of the greatest museums of this sort on Earth. And I would say that if you go to Mexico City, make it a stop. In the background on the wall, you can see that Tenochtitlan was situated on an island in the middle of a lake. The lake was Lake Texcoco. It has long since been drained, and Mexico City now sprawls out across the lake bed. Also, notice that the city has several causeways that connect it to the shoreline. These were not only transportation routes, they brought fresh water into the city. Well, wasn't the city surrounded by a lake? What about that water? That water was fetid and brackish because of the effluents and human waste that came from the city. So they needed to bring in fresh water from the mountains. Also, notice the 3D model in the foreground. That was the center of the city. Notice the pyramids, which were religious structures, along the large open square between them. Keep that in mind. One last thing, if you look back at the painting on the wall, notice in the background the volcanoes with the snow on their peaks. Take a look at this map depicting the area in 1519. You can see where Tenochtitlan is on the island. But then notice Texcoco and Tlacopan. These three made up the Triple Alliance. That is generally referred to as the Aztec Empire. Also notice the green areas labeled Chinampas. These were floating gardens, farmland, that they had created, kind of like floating islands. The last remnant of this can still be visited at Xochimilco, south of Mexico City, which you can see at the bottom of this map. The simplest answer to who these people were is the Aztecs, but the real story is much more complex. They called themselves Mexica. This is where we get the word Mexico and Mexican from. Aztec is the name the Spanish assigned to them based on the Mexican creation story. The reality is that they were a tripartite state made up of an alliance between these three powerful local city-states that I mentioned. These three, let's call them the Aztecs to simplify things, fiercely conquered the surrounding indigenous groups. The last leader of the Aztecs was Moctezuma, and then in 1519 the Spanish arrived. The conquest of Mexico was led by Hernán Cortés. He was accompanied by several hundred Spanish soldiers who had sailed with him from Cuba along the northern coast of the Yucatan and then landed at Veracruz. En route to Tenochtitlan, the Spanish made alliances with thousands of local Indians. Why would the Indians do this, align themselves with the Spanish? Well, the Aztecs had sown the seeds of their own destruction. And that was the way they had treated the conquered surrounding Indian groups. Their fierce subjugation of these groups included destroying their religious sites, forcing them to worship Aztec gods, taking their land and forcing them to work that land for corrupt Aztec elites, enslaving them, and sacrificing them to Aztec gods. This did not make for good foreign relations. And these indigenous groups, although they didn't feel any affinity for the Spanish, saw the Spanish as the enemy of their worst enemy, the Aztecs. So they joined them in the assault on Tenochtitlan. Let's go through the advantages and disadvantages that each side had. The Spanish had firearms and cannons, unheard of in the Americas. And although primitive and not very accurate, they were brutal when they hit you and were loud and spit fire and smoke, which would have been terrifying to people who had never seen them. Plus, the Spanish had steel. Their swords were sharp and durable and deadly. And they had metal breastplates and helmets that could repel the indigenous weaponry. Marching into Tenochtitlan with thousands of allied Indians can also not be underestimated in terms of its visual impact. These people knew the lay of the land, and they could assist with the cultural components that were at work. This gave the Spanish inside knowledge of Aztec culture, including the fact that several things aligned in 1519 to help the Spanish conquer the Aztecs. Amongst them was the anticipation of a returning conquering god Quetzalcoatl. When the Spanish found this out, they pretended to be that god, though that god was a pacifist god and the Spanish were not pacifist. And probably the most important part was that they brought diseases with them that the Indians had no immunities to. And these diseases decimated the indigenous populations of the Americas over the next 100 to 200 years, including the Aztecs. Amongst these diseases were smallpox, influenza, the common cold, malaria, and yellow fever. The last of these two, spread by mosquitoes, and originated in Africa. Unfortunately for the Americas, there are about 5 mosquito species in the Western Hemisphere that can contract malaria and yellow fever and then disseminate them. And they did. So why the picture of this Bernini sculpture? Bernini did this when he was about 10 years old. I've included it because this commonplace event in Europe in the 16th century led to the deaths of 90% of the indigenous populations in the Americas. Can you see what's happening here? Look carefully. 2 children are milking a goat, and the one on the right is drinking that milk. The great infectious diseases that have swept through the world have overwhelmingly been transferred from animals to humans. Smallpox, cowpox, the flu, the cold, measles, all of these transferred to humans from domesticated old world animals. People in the old world slowly developed immunities to these diseases, but the people of the Americas had no contact with these diseases, and they were crushed. What were the advantages of the Aztecs? Well, there were more of them, and a lot more, and they knew their own landscape. But that's probably it, because they had no immunities to those diseases. Their military was fine for fighting other indigenous groups, but obsidian spears, arrowheads, and knives were no match for steel and firearms, any more than Genghis Khan's army would be a match for the stealth bombers of today. The Spanish cut off the causeways to Tenochtitlan, which cut food and, more importantly, water supplies. And Moctezuma was taken hostage and eventually killed. How is somewhat debatable, but ultimately he died, which decapitated the leadership. And there were other factors as well. The Spanish had horses, which allowed quick movement and superior battle strategies. Not to mention the first reports to reach Tenochtitlan about whatever had just landed at Veracruz were that they had 4 legs, which were the horses, breathed fire, which were the guns, and were metallic, which is the armor. The Aztecs were superior astronomers. And the years the Spanish arrive, a comet is going to cross the sky, which they took as portending messages from the gods. Remember the volcano I mentioned in that photograph? The Popocatépetl volcano was erupting that year. And the Aztecs always took eruption of the Popocatépetl as bringing disaster. Conjoined twins were born in Tenochtitlan the year the Spanish arrived. Another sign. A raven landed on a human body that Moctezuma was sacrificing. Another sign. And the Aztecs had a calendar that would be adjusted in certain years to maintain accuracy with the seasons. And the year Cortez arrived was the year the calendar needed to be adjusted. So the Aztecs were looking for something because of these signs. And the something that arrived was the Spanish. The Battle of the Aztec Empire went from 1519 to 1521, when the Aztec resistance ceased. Immediately, the Spanish began to take Tenochtitlan down brick by brick and build Mexico City. They even used the same basic pattern left behind by the Aztecs. The methodology used by the Spanish to create both Mexico City and cities throughout the Americas is known as the Spanish Colonial Grid System. You can see several examples of this on the maps to the right, including Caracas, Lima, Buenos Aires, and even Los Angeles. At the center of the system is a plaza, a big open square. In Mexico City, this is known as the Zocalo. Then around the plaza, they put the most important buildings for the Spanish. The church, in the case of Mexico City, it's a cathedral, government buildings, and the major merchants, businesses. It's a very logical system. The streets then emanate outwards in a grid. By doing this, you are one right or one left turn from the center of the city. Where's the plaza? Go 3 blocks down, turn right, and you can't miss it, and so on. Here's a reminder of what Tenochtitlan looked like. Pay attention to the center of the island and those pyramids in the model. Here. And here. This is that same city center today. The same exact square. Now the Zocalo of Mexico City. This is the Cathedral of Mexico City. Remember the Spanish put the church on the square? And this is the National Palace. These photographs are a little blurry because I was having a very large, very delicious margarita at a hotel bar while I was taking them, so sorry. Now let's look at an aerial view. This is the center of Mexico City. Here's the Zocalo, the plaza, and here's the cathedral, and here's the National Palace. And if you look closely, you can see the street pattern is arranged in a grid, all 90-degree angles. From the central plaza, Mexico City has grown outwards. In 1950, Mexico City covered about 30 square miles. Today, it covers 3,000 square miles and has between 21 and 24 million people living in the area. What has happened is called conurbation. This is the grouping together of cities due to massive urban growth, very similar to many cities in the United States, most obviously Los Angeles. The city grows out and over the top of everything around it, gluing all of the smaller cities together into a massive urban metropolis and covering up all of the agricultural land. Mexico City has grown to dominate in such a way that we also refer to this type of urban structure as a primate city. This is a city that is at least twice the size of the next biggest city. And in the case of Mexico City, the next biggest city would be Guadalajara. Mexico City is several times larger than Guadalajara and dominates all aspects of the country. This means it dominates the politics, the media, the transportation network, the economy, maybe even the education system. So take a look here. Mexico City sprawls across every inch of flat land in the area. One last thing. This is Teotihuacan. Actually, the real name is unknown, but the Aztecs called it that, which translates to something like the place where men became gods. The Aztec elite used to go out to Teotihuacan to pray. It is today about 90 minutes from Mexico City. I mentioned it briefly when talking about the Mayan trade network, if you recall. This site had already collapsed by the time the Aztec Empire arose. These people were contemporaries of the ancient Maya during the peak of Mayan society, probably 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. That large pyramid in the distance on the left is one of the largest pyramids in the world. At the time of its peak, the city would have been one of the largest cities on Earth. If you go to Mexico City, don't miss it.